All right, if you have your Bible, go ahead and grab it and turn with me to 1 Peter chapter 4. I was going to make a comment about last week's Easter services and how great they were, but I think I'm just going to say this one was even better than that. That was good. That was good singing. Can we sing Leaning on the Everlasting Arms every week, just like that? That was fun. I want to do that every week. Good job. 1 Peter chapter 4. I would just address how crazy it is that I've been here for 15 years. I haven't been the pastor for 15 years. I've been the pastor for about 5, and I was the associate pastor for about 10 before that. But it's just incredible to me. I never, ever imagined when I came here. I didn't know where Gownsville was. I didn't. When Chad called me, I've told this before, but I didn't know where Gownsville was. He said, would you be interested in coming and being the associate pastor at Gownsville? And I was like, I thought it was McCaddenville. I thought it was the place that did the Christmas lights. And I just didn't know. I didn't know where it was. And I had no idea that I'd be here this long. And I shared this earlier. There's good and bad things about being at a place for a long time. When you've been there a long time, you get to know people very well. And so that makes the good times very good, but it also makes the hard times very hard. So it's sweet to celebrate and watch, kids grow up. And I haven't known the Vanderfors as long, but just seeing their kids grow up and go through the waters of baptism and thinking back over the 15 years that I've been here and all the children and adults that I've been able to be a part of baptizing. I sympathize with Paul. I don't remember all the people that I baptized. I couldn't tell you who it is. If you could come up and say, you remember that time when you baptized me? And I'd probably be like, no, I don't remember. I just know I've done a bunch over the years, and that's a blessing. But it's a joy. The thing about it, Kent said, when you become a pastor, you got about 4 years to learn that they're not perfect. And I think the thing with me is, you got to know that way before I ever became the pastor. You already knew I wasn't perfect. And I'm still not perfect, and I won't be perfect. I'll miss plenty of things. I'll mess up on things, and that's just part of being a human. And you will too, okay? So it's not just me. You're going to miss it too. But what a joy to be at this place. You can only be somewhere for a long time if you love the people and you love the place you are. There's no way that's going to happen. And one of the reasons why churches or pastors don't stay at churches for very long is it just, there's some rough places to be. It's not always the church's fault. Sometimes the pastor's fault too, but there's hard situations that you can serve in, and this is a place that allows me to serve in joy, and I'm just so grateful for that. So thank you for helping make this church be a place that is a joy to serve at. And who knows, God may leave me here until I retire or die first, whichever comes first. I don't know. I have no idea. But I look forward in the years ahead to seeing what God's going to do. And I am excited about that still. I know last year was a rough year. It was probably, of all the 15 years that I was here and the 2 years I was in ministry before that, last year was the hardest of all the 17 years of ministry I've had, and the hardest personally for me in my whole life, just period, with all the things that happened from my sister and other things that took place last year. It was a hard year. And I finished the year going, I don't know how long I can do it, God. And I don't know. I really don't know how long I'm going to be able to do it. And then, just going into this year, I've just had an enormous amount of hopefulness. And I see that confirmed in so many different ways. I see it confirmed in the things that are happening here, the way that people are being discipled here and watching people grow here. And, now having Jed here on staff, and along with already an incredible staff with Kent and with Lisa and Becky in the nursery and just others, and Paul now and Charlie, and just so many good people that make, from a staff perspective, make this church go well. And I want to remind you to continue to pray for our student pastor search. Don't forget about it. It's too important. What a crucial thing that we identify the man that God's called to come here and serve in that role, and just encouraging our parents and our students that are still there. God has someone in mind. He knows who it's going to be. We don't know yet who it's going to be, but He does know. And I just want to challenge you. Please continue to pray for that. I don't think you have to pray for it every single time you pray. But how about at least once a week? Ask the Lord to move in that and to send that person our way and show us who's going to take our students and just grow. I'm so thankful for the people we have serving, but we need that. We need it. So thank you for praying for that. So today we're going to move into the last section of this letter. It took us just 27 short weeks to get to the last section of the letter of 1 Peter, but that means that we are almost done. And my plan now is that we're going to finish this letter in about 2 weeks. I think I have 2 more messages. That's always subject to change, but that's the plan as of now, that we should finish this up next week, or in 2 weeks, and then we'll have special mission emphasis on the last Sunday of this month. I really want you to be there for that. I want you to hear some stories from the Carpenters for Christ team that came back, and then I look so forward to hearing John Zimmer's going to be bringing the word that morning, going to be sharing from the Bible that morning, and preaching and just sharing some of the experience that he's had as well over the past year as he served overseas. And so I'm looking forward to that. But we should be done with 1 Peter by the time we get there. So a lot of need to cover this morning and need to jump on in. So if you already have your place in the Bible, let's go ahead and pick up starting in verse 12. The Bible says, "Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice insofar as you share Christ's sufferings, that you may also rejoice and be glad when His glory is revealed. If you are insulted for the name of Christ, you're blessed, because the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you." That's familiar to us. We've covered the blessing of suffering for Christ already. Verse 15, "But let none of you suffer as a murderer or a thief or an evildoer or as a meddler. Yet if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in that name. For it is time for judgment to begin at the household of God. And if it begins with us, what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God? And if the righteous is scarcely saved, what will become of the ungodly and the sinner? Therefore, let those who suffer according to God's will entrust their souls to a faithful Creator while doing good." If you look back in verse 12, Peter calls the trials that we go through as Christians for Christ, he calls those trials fiery trials. And so I'm calling the message this morning, how to stay cool when the fire gets hot. How do you stay cool when the fire gets hot? Last Sunday, Easter Sunday, after a wonderful day of worship, and went and spent the afternoon with family that was in town, and then sleep just overwhelmed me about 3:30 or so, sitting in my chair trying to watch basketball, and man, I just couldn't resist any longer. I just closed my eyes and fell asleep sitting up in my chair in the den. After all that, we wake up, and Brooke decides that she wants to do a fire pit that night. And I love her. I didn't think it was a fire pit kind of night. I just didn't think it was. It didn't seem like a fire pit kind of night to me. But she was bound and determined to do a fire pit, especially after our last experience with a fire pit. We had done one before that. We made this fire pit last year, built it up, did everything you do to make a fire pit. I guess it was last year, maybe longer than that. And we've only done it once. And the first experience, I think, scared us all from it because it was like a smoke pit. That's all it was. We got no fire, all smoke. That was it. But this one went way better. We had a lot of dry kindling and some good dry pieces of wood that we could throw in the fire. We had a lighter instead of a box of matches that wasn't working real well last time. So we had what we needed. The fire burned hot and stayed the whole time we wanted it to. We continued to stoke it. I did put it out accidentally once during the process, but it went really well. And by the time we were done with it, at the end of the night, we dragged the hose out, and by the time I put it out and doused it with the water to put it out, there was nothing left in the fire pit but just the ashes that were left over. The fire had consumed the wood that we had thrown in there, leaving nothing but ashes. And what I want you to know this morning as we go into this today, that the fires that you go through in your life, they are either going to consume you or they are going to refine you. The fires that you go through in your life are either going to burn you up or they're going to make you better. And which one of those things is true in your life depends not on the fire, but on the way that you handle the fire. That's the determining factor there, and what the fire does in your life. It's about how you handle it. And if you handle the fiery trials poorly, if you handle them badly, then it's going to consume you. It's going to burn you up. But if you handle them well, then something different is going to happen through the fire. What you'll find is that you become refined by the fire. Now, it's the same fire, right? We're not talking about two different kinds of fire. It's the same fire, but different results, and the only difference is you. The only difference is you. What we're looking at today is, how do we handle those fiery trials well? That's what we want to do. We want to handle them the right way. We want to handle them well so that they do what God is attempting to do through the fires. And so first of all, if you want to handle the fire well, you need to be ready. You need to be ready for it. Peter said in verse 12, do not be surprised at the fiery trial, listen to this, when it comes upon you. What I want to point out first of all is he says that the trial comes upon you. It comes upon you. Last summer, when our family was in Colorado, after the kids went home, Brooke and I took a tour of the Navigators headquarters there in Colorado Springs. If you ever have a chance to go there, if you're ever in Colorado Springs, go check out Glen Erie Castle. It's literally it's like an American castle. It was built to resemble and be like a castle. But that became the headquarters of the Navigators. They're a Christian ministry, a discipleship-focused organization. And we went and took that tour, and it was an awesome tour, just incredible. I left there going, I really want to live here in this castle. That's where I want to live. I want my home to be that. It wasn't just the house, it was the setting. Man, it was just gorgeous, like everything else out there is gorgeous. But we finished the tour up, and we went down to the coffee shop. You know, I got to have my coffee, and I got a cup of coffee. We went out into the courtyard, and as we're out in the courtyard, we noticed that the wind started to pick up. Like the temperature drops a little bit, the wind starts to pick up, and the sky just got ominously dark out of nowhere. I mean, just ominous darkness. And we're like, okay, that looks a little scary, but we took shelter under the cover out there on the courtyard. But all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the sky opens up and these icy golf balls just start coming down out of the sky. I'm not exaggerating when I say they were definitely golf ball size hail that just pours out of the sky. And we were safe, but the problem was the car wasn't. And if it would have been our car, I'm not sure we would have done anything about it. But Brooke said, Josh, that's a rental. We did not pony up for the extra insurance to cover things like this. And so we need to get to the car and do something. I'm like, okay, but what? What are we supposed to do? But we tear off, we run, dodging golf balls coming out of the sky. And we get to the car, we get in, it's like, now what? Like the hail is raining down from the sky. I'm talking just like, it's piling up on the ground. So like the only thing we could do was just get one of the lucky few parking spaces up under a tree. And we pull the car up under the tree as close as we can get to it. And then we basically just had to wait it out and hope for the best. Just hope there wasn't too much damage to be done by the hail. But the point I'm making here is there was no warning. Like we had no warning. We had no warning on our weather app. It looked good. We had signed up to leave from there and go do something called the Manitou Incline, which is this really stupid thing that I don't think I would have made it up anyway, but I'm so glad we weren't on the middle of that when the hail came. But we were signed up to do that. There was no advance warning. There was no notifications on the app going, hey, if you're out around 2, be careful. There's probably going to be a massive golf ball size hailstorm coming. We got no notifications about it. It just came upon us all of a sudden. And isn't that usually how the trials come in your life? When he says the trials that come upon you, that seems to be the case. It always seems to be that we don't get the notification telling us that we need to be looking out for trials today. If you're out around 2 o'clock, there's a fiery trial coming your way. Just keep your eyes open. We don't get that warning there. Instead, it's just us going along, living our life the best we can, trying to follow the Lord the best that we can, and then out of nowhere, the wind picks up, the sky gets dark, and the trial comes on us. And so when that happens, we're not ready. We're just not ready for it. And about all that unprepared people can do is what Brooke and I did. Just wait it out and hope for the best. But I don't think in our life, I don't think that's the right strategy. Do you? Is the strategy for dealing with the fiery trials that come upon us, is the right strategy just wait it out, hope for the best? No, I don't think that's it at all. You want to be ready, because ready people handle things better than unready people do. It's just bottom line. When you're ready for something, you handle it better than when you're not ready for it. Now, you look at people that go through trials, and sometimes they thrive through that trial, and you think, well, maybe they're just quicker on their feet. Maybe they're smarter. Maybe they just have more resolve. Maybe they're just whatever. And that may all be true, but what I've learned, and I bet you've learned this too, it's far more true of ready people than unready people for some reason. Being ready means having a mindset of expectation. That's what we mean here. I'm not talking about being a prepper, although that could be a good idea, but I'm talking about having a mindset of expectation in which you ask this question. You have to ask the question, is there a reasonable expectation that this could happen? Whatever it might be. You have to ask that. That's having that ready mindset. Is there a reasonable expectation that this could happen? Whatever. Is there a reasonable expectation of a hurricane? What do you think? Up here? Not really. I mean, we don't have to worry so much with hurricanes. It's very rare that a hurricane would affect us up here. But how about if you live at the coast? Is there a reasonable expectation, if you live on the beach, that a hurricane may impact you at some point in time when you live there? Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a very reasonable expectation a hurricane will sweep through. Now, can you know when you move into that home there on the beach, can you know that a hurricane is going to come through and you're going to be in the line and path of the hurricane? Can you know that ahead of time? No, you can't know that ahead of time. Can you know when you built the house, when you buy the house? Can you know if your house is going to be damaged by that hurricane? No, you can't know that at all. But, is there an expectation that it could happen? Yes, absolutely there is. And so you would be foolish if you live in a place where that expectation is reasonable and maybe even likely. You would be foolish to live there and ignore that possibility. You would be foolish to look at that and go, you know what, I don't think it's going to happen to me. You know, I've lived at the coast for a long time. My family grew up there. We've been through hurricanes before. None's ever tracked over me. I think I'm good. I'm not going to take any preparations. I'm just going to ignore it and hope for the best. No, that's not going to be the case, because when it hits, you're going to go, whoa, that's crazy. I never saw that coming. But you should have. That's the point. You should have. You cannot say, if you live at the beach and a hurricane demolishes your house, I never saw that coming. Boy, I never imagined. Now, if you live here and a hurricane demolishes your house, you may go, I never saw that coming. That would be reasonable, right? But not there. And it's the same with trials. You have to ask yourself the question, is there a reasonable expectation of the fiery trials that Peter talks about right here? What do you think? Is it a reasonable expectation? Give me some nods. Is it reasonable to expect that? All right. Some of you don't know, okay? Some of you just don't like feedback, all right? Yes, I'll answer it for you. Yes, there is. If you are a Christian, there absolutely is a reasonable expectation of fiery trials coming upon you of the type that Peter talks about right here. And that's why Peter said here, do not be surprised as if it were something strange. That word strange, when we hear strange, we think weird, but that's not what he's saying. He's not saying don't be surprised at the fiery trials that come upon you to test you, as if it were something weird or eerie or spooky or something like that. No, it's the same word, once again, that Peter's used several different times in this passage. It's the same word that we get the word stranger, foreigner, alien, exile. It's that same word, the theme of the whole book. Peter finds a way to tie it back in once again. And so essentially what he's saying is those fiery trials should not seem foreign to you. You as a Christian should not feel like that the trials are strangers paying you a visit. You should not feel like those fiery trials in your life are out of place. They're not out of place for believers living as exiles in a world that is not their home. That should not feel out of place for us. No, it's something that that should not surprise us, he said. And Jesus taught this over and over again. He many times, he said in Matthew 10:22, you will be hated by all for my name's sake. He said in John chapter 15, verse 18, if the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. What does hate lead to? Hate leads to hurt. Hate leads to fire. Hate leads to trials. Jesus warned us already about that, and there's plenty other verses saying the same thing. And so that means there is no excuse as a believer. There is no excuse for not being ready, for not having that mindset of expectation about these trials. We might not know when it's going to be. We might not know if it's going to be, because maybe it won't happen in your life. Maybe it won't be intense in your life, just like people do live at the beach all their lives and a hurricane never demolishes their home. That can happen. You can go through life as a Christian and not face these same kinds of fiery trials that Peter's talking about right here. That's possible, but you need to be ready for it. You may not get an alert about when it's about to happen, but Peter says right here, just consider this advance warning. This is not a notification in the moment. It's way advance warning. The same way that you might be reminded as you buy the house. Remember, there could be hurricanes that come through here. So number one, if you want to handle the fiery trials well, be ready for them. Be ready. Number two, we have to recognize the point. Recognize the point. Verse 12 again, I want you to notice just this little phrase that it's almost like Peter just drops in there, just kind of slips it in there in verse 12. He said, beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to what? Test you. I think a question a lot of believers ask when they're going through those fiery trials, a lot of times believers will ask the question, why is God allowing this to happen to me? You may have asked that yourself. You may not want to admit that you asked that question, but in your heart you know you've asked the question before. Why is God allowing this to happen? Why would He allow people to mock His children? Why would He allow people to mistreat His children? Why would He allow people to hurt His children? Why would He not protect us? Why? It's like, is He punishing us? Is He punishing me? Is this God's punishment that I'm going through, this fiery trial? Is it that I've done something that made God mad? Does God not like me anymore? Like He used to like me, He used to love me, but this proves that He doesn't love me or like me anymore. What is it? But the fire, this is what I want you to know. You're not recognizing the point when you go in that direction. When you see it as God's punishment in your life, or His abandonment of you in your life, or maybe He just doesn't like you anymore, that's missing the point here. No. Peter said, this is not because God's mad at you. The fire is there to test you. It's there to test you. So what's the point of a test? Think back to your days in school. Some of you are there now. Think back to the time in school when it was test day, when it was exam day. What was the purpose of the test? When you were going through it, you probably thought it's just because your teacher was mean. Is that true, Danielle? Is that why teachers do it? They're just mean. They just want to make your life miserable. Like, why do you have to do this? Why do you have to give me this test? What are you trying to do? But no. It's not because they're mean. It's not because they want to make you miserable. No, the point of the test is so that you can prove yourself. That's the whole point. The whole point of the test is so that you can prove yourself. You want to know how much of the material do you remember? How much of the stuff stuck with you? How much of it can you recall? How much of it did you master? What is it that you still need to do? And that's the point here. That's Peter's point here in talking about the fiery trials. He's saying the fiery trials that come upon us are the way that we prove ourselves to God. It's a test of the genuineness of our faith. You are proving that your faith is genuine. You are proving what you've received from the Lord and what kind of impact that's had in your life, and how you've grown and how far you've come, and what parts of the Christian life are you beginning to master. How spiritually mature am I now? The fire is the proof of where I am. All right? It's the proof of where I am. But that's not all it is. It's not just the proof of where I am right now, but it's also part of the process for making me better. If all the test did was show where I am, that would be weak. All right? There's more to it than that. All right? So the test is also there as part of the process for helping you grow, because just as important as showing you what you do know, the test also shows you what you don't know. All those things you missed on the test. It shows you what you didn't remember, what you didn't master, what you couldn't recall. It shows you what you still need improvement on. And I always appreciated when my teacher would allow us to go back after the test was over and correct our mistakes. Did your teacher ever do that? Let you take the test back, correct your mistakes. Now, why did I appreciate it? I appreciated it because it allowed me to get a better grade than what I would have gotten otherwise. But the point of that is to help you go back and relearn the stuff you missed. Is to help you go back and master the stuff you missed the first time, the stuff you didn't quite have a grasp on. And that is very important, because what you see there is the fire helps you to grow. I said back at the beginning that when the fire comes upon you, those fiery trials come upon you, it's either going to consume you or it's going to refine you. It's either going to burn you up or it's going to make you better. But if you see this as some miserable punishment, what you're going through, this fiery trial, is some miserable punishment from the Lord, then what's happening is you're being burnt up by it. It's consuming you. It's not doing what God is trying to do through the fire. But if you can recognize the point, if you can see the point in what God is doing here, then it is going to change your perspective. That's what I'm trying to help you see this morning. I'm trying to get some perspective changes in our hearts and in our minds and in the way that we see, the way that we view this. Because when you see what God's doing through it, then your perspective changes, and you go from the perspective of seeing yourself as a piece of wood burning up in the fire into ashes. That changes. That's not what you are, believer. You're not a block of wood sitting in the fire being burned up into ashes. You will see it from the perspective of a piece of iron in the fire being forged. You will see yourself from the perspective of a piece of gold in the fire being refined by the fire. You will see it as God using this fiery trial to mold you and to shape you and to grow you more and more into the image of Jesus. But you need the heat to soften you to the hands of God at work in your life. You need the heat to be hot enough to melt away all of those impurities. And you need the eyes to see what God's hands are actually doing. That every painful blow you receive is a hammer blow from God. It's forging you and shaping you and molding you into an instrument, a tool that can be used for His glory and for your good. And every degree of heat from the fire, as hot as it gets, is God melting away everything impure in you, so that what comes out of the fire is more pure and more refined than what went into it. And I hope you understand, that does not happen the same way in comfort and in ease as it does in the fire. Gold can only be refined in the fire. Iron can only be forged in the fire. And sometimes what God wants to do in your life can only be done in the fire. It can only be done in the fire. And so when the fire comes on you, remember what God is doing through it. Recognize the point. There is a point to it. God is doing something through it. He is making you more like Christ now. Number 3. I'm rolling several things into one here in number 3. Staying cool when the fire's hot. How do we handle the fiery trials that come upon us? Number 3, we have to have the right response. The right response. I'm going to break this down in 3 ways here. How do you respond when the fire happens? How do you respond when the fire comes on you? Number 1, first response is rejoice. Look at verse 13. He said, "But rejoice insofar as you share Christ's sufferings, that you may also rejoice and be glad when His glory is revealed." Now we read that, and I know it sounds crazy. Does it sound crazy to you? Take away everything you know about who God is. If you're hearing this for the first time, and someone says, when the fiery trials come upon you, you should rejoice. Don't you look at that and go, you're crazy. How am I supposed to do that? How am I supposed to rejoice when I'm in the fire? How am I supposed to rejoice in the middle of my suffering? But that is exactly what it says. Well, how do I do it? Beyond what I just said about recognizing the point. You also have to see not just the point, but the purpose of it. See, the point is what God is doing now in it. The purpose is what that leads to one day. It's not just about what God's doing in your life now through the fire. It's about what He's getting you ready for one day. So all the fire that you're going through, the hammering, the molding, the shaping, the forging, the refining, all of that is all leading me to what's coming one day. That He is doing all that work, shaping, forging, melting, refining, all of that. So that one day I will be presented to God as spotless, holy, and perfect. So that one day when Jesus returns, I'm going to be ready to meet Him. That means when I go through the fire, I don't just focus on how the fire hurts me. I focus on the future. I have to look ahead to that day. Peter essentially saying, like, if you can rejoice now in the middle of the fire, in the middle of the trial, in the middle of the suffering, then think about how much more you're going to be able to rejoice. He adds 2 words. He said, you will rejoice and be glad. All he's doing is intensifying the rejoicing. Like, if I can rejoice now in the fire, think of how I'm going to be able to rejoice when the glory of God is before me, when the glory of Jesus is unveiled before me. Because the Bible says that when we meet Jesus, that when we see Jesus for who He really is, that we're going to be transformed, that we're going to become perfectly like Him, that when Jesus returns, all His glory will be seen by us, and we'll mirror that in a full and true way. And it's going to make all of the heat and the light and the brightness of the fire, that's all going to be overwhelmed by the glory of the Lord when Christ returns. So He says, rejoice, because one day, no matter how hard it is now, one day you'll see the glory of Jesus and be transformed. Second response, it's not just to rejoice, but it's to represent. It's to represent. If you look down at 14, if you are insulted, look at this, for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you. You have the Spirit. You belong to God. Verse 15, but let none of you suffer as a murderer or a thief or an evildoer or as a meddler. Yet if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in that name. This goes back to something we've talked about over and over, something Peter's hammered throughout this letter. This goes back to the way that we live our lives, to our behavior as those who carry the name of Jesus. You understand, don't you, that if you call yourself a Christian, that if you claim to follow Christ, that you carry the name of Jesus. You represent Jesus wherever it is that you go. And the point in this is that you and I are called on to carry the name of Jesus well. That if we would call ourselves a Christian, one who a little Christ, one who follows Christ, then we need to make sure that our behavior reflects that. We need to make sure that we're not fueling the fire, because you can fuel the fire of fiery trials. You can fan that through sin. You can fan that through stupidity. Right? And there's no honor in that. There's no blessing in that. God's not blessing you because you're suffering for doing stupid things, right? We've already talked about that. That's not new to you. We understand that very well. So we need to make sure our behavior reflects it. Make sure that our suffering is for following Jesus and not for, he lists several things here, not because we're murderers, thieves, evildoers, and this one's interesting here, meddlers. Like, that one seems a little out of place, doesn't it? Like, we can all agree, I got this, guys. I'm not suffering for murder. I can promise you that. I've never killed anybody. I'm not suffering for stealing. I don't steal. I'm not suffering for being an evildoer. But a meddler? This is like, it reminds me of Paul in Romans chapter 1. He's going through this whole list of these awful things and the tragic consequences of the fall and sin and worshiping things other than God. He's, it's just heartless, evil, ruthless, all this stuff. And then he throws in, and don't obey parents. It's like, okay. That raises the kids. You better obey your parents. So he puts meddler in here. What is a meddler? What's a meddler mean? Well, it's being a busybody. It's getting up in other people's business. And I believe, just from as studying the text, I believe what he's talking about is Christians staying out of other people's homes. I don't mean literally. I mean not digging their noses into to lost people's business. I believe that's what he's trying to say here. It's like, the church sees people that don't know the Lord, people that don't follow Christ, and become quick to point out all the things that they're doing bad. You seen that? You've seen those Christians, pointing out, getting in the house, getting in the business of lost people for doing lost people things. But I've said this a billion times. Why would you ever be surprised when lost people do lost people things? All right? Lost people are going to act like lost people. That's, by definition, that's what they are. All right? So he's saying you need to stay out of how lost people are living their lives. That's not your business. Paul said this in 1 Corinthians 5:12 and 13. He said, "For what have I to do with judging outsiders, lost people in the world?" He said, "Is it not those inside the church whom you are to judge?" If you're a part of a church and you ever get judged on something, please do not go, "You ain't supposed to judge me, only God can judge me." No, Paul said right here, we're to judge those on the inside, right? That's what we should be doing, taking care of ourselves. He said, God judges those outside. Purge the evil person from among you. Now, Peter is saying the same thing right here. He's saying that how they live as lost people is not really our business. That's not our business. He said in verse 17, "For it is time for judgment." Listen to this. This is what I want you to remember. "For it is time for judgment to begin at the household of God." He's saying we need to start with ourselves. Before we get to meddling in what lost people are doing, he said, why don't you start with your house? Take care of your house. Clean your house. Don't complain about other people's houses. And listen, church, we got plenty enough to keep us busy within the body of Christ. We got plenty enough that we need to deal with as a body without wading into other people's business. Listen, God is going to judge the lost. We want them to be saved. We want to share the gospel. We want them to come into relationship with Jesus. But God's going to judge. That's not our place. The rest of verse 17. Look how he closes this up. He said, "For it is time for judgment to begin at the household of God, and if it begins with us, what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God? And if the righteous is scarcely saved, what will become of the ungodly and the sinner?" Right? God will be the judge. We handle our house. We handle our business. God is refining us. He's refining you. He's refining us. He's forging you. He's forging us. He's shaping us together. We need to handle our business. That's what I tell my kids all the time. You need to handle your business. We need to handle our business. We represent Christ. The bottom line is, don't give people any reason to persecute you other than your faithfulness to Jesus. Don't give them a reason to persecute you because you're digging in their house, because you're a murderer, a thief, or just an evildoer. You represent Christ. Your behavior reflects that. Number 3. This is the last response. We'll be done. Last response is release. Release. Look at verse 19, sweetest verse in the passage. "Therefore, let those who suffer according to God's will entrust their souls to a faithful Creator while doing good." That word entrust means, it was a banking term that meant to deposit something for safekeeping. Deposit for safekeeping. Now, this is not as common anymore, but you know people that are scared to put their money in someone else's hands. You ever met anybody like that? They don't trust the banks. It's like, I'm not putting my money in the bank. I can't see it. I don't know what they do with it. I'm not even sure it's actually there. If I want to go get it, can I get it? What if I need it on a Saturday? What if I need it on a Sunday? I don't want anybody to have it to me. What if I lose it? I'm not putting my money in somebody else's hands because I don't know if it's going to be safe. Therefore, I'm keeping it myself. I'm going to hold on to it. I'm going to take my money. I'm going to put it in a safe. I'm going to bury it out in the backyard. I'm going to hide it under the mattress. I'm going to stick it in the wall. I'm going to put it in the attic. I'm going to stuff it behind the dryer in the basement. I'm going to hold on to it myself anywhere that only I can control it. And we do that because we think it's safer that way. But is it really? Is it safer in your hands? Are you confident? Are you sure that what you can do with it is better than what somebody else could do for it? Is it worth the risk to you? How many of you know I'm not talking about money right now? Some of you are doing that with your life. That's what you're doing with your life. You are holding on to your life, your soul tight. Keeping it to yourself. I'm just going to hold on to it. I'm going to keep it. That's the only way I can know it's safe. The only way I know it's safe is if my life is in my hands. I can't rely on anyone else. I'm not entrusting myself to anybody but me. And that way, when the fire gets too hot, I'm in control. When the fire gets too hot, I can get out. I can escape. I can escape the fire. But the only thing you need to know is, you need to know this, the only thing you're doing is you are trading your eternal safety for what you think is temporary safety. That's all you're doing. Because you may be able to get out of the fire. I can escape. I can flee. I can get out if it's in my control, if it's in my hands. You may be able to get out of the fire. But in order for you to do that, you've got to get out of something else. Peter said the fire, the trials, the suffering, he said that is according to God's will. That He's the one that allowed it. He might not have made it happen, but He allowed it to happen, and He is sovereign over it. And so for you to get out of the fire that God allowed you to go into, you have to get out of God's will. That's the only way out. The only way out of the fire God allowed you to go through is to go through it until God's done or until you get out of His will. That means I stop living my life God's way and I start living my life my way. If your life is in your hands, you're living it your way. That is by definition outside of the will of God. And you can do that and avoid the suffering. You can do that and get out of the suffering. But you're getting out of God's will. And I want to ask you this morning, would you really say, I'd rather get out of the fire than be in God's will? I don't think anybody would admit that, but is your life saying that? I'd rather get out of the fire than be in God's will. Are you willing this morning to trade your eternal safety for the illusion of temporary safety? Because that's all it is. It's an illusion. It's an illusion of safety. Do you really think that if you hold on tightly to your life, you're keeping it safe? Do you believe that? If I hold my life in my hands, I'm keeping it safe. You know what Jesus said? He said that the ones that hold on to their life will lose it. But the ones that lose their life for my sake will find it. That was not empty words from Jesus. Jesus put that into practice. I think it's interesting. On the cross, in Luke 23, Jesus used the exact same word that Peter uses right here. In Luke 23:46, Jesus said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. It's translated differently, but it's the same Greek word. Jesus entrusted Himself into the Father's hands even as He died. He entrusted His life into the care of His faithful Creator even as He breathed His last. And I wonder, would you do that? Would you be willing to do that? Would you be willing this morning to release your soul, your life, into the care of your faithful Creator? Would you be ready this morning to stop holding on tight to your soul? Stop holding on tight to your life. Peter said here, let that go. You need to let it go. Is there somebody in here this morning in the fire that needs to let it go? Let go of the control. Let go of your life. As we close today, I wonder, do you need to deposit your life in His care? Would you give your soul to Him? I want you to know that even if you die, God is the only safe place for you. Even if you suffer, God is the only safe place for you. He is safe even in the suffering. So my question as we close is, do you trust Him? Whatever you're going through, do you trust Him? And if you trust Him, Peter said, entrust yourself to Him. Show you trust Him. Make that deposit. Put your life in His hands. And I love the simplicity of the way He finishes. Entrust your soul to your Creator while doing good. Keep doing it. Put your trust in your sovereign God and keep living His way.